Sonic 3 and Knuckles really is a complete package. As many of you are no doubt aware, this game was so big that Sega had to split it into 2 parts. But man, that lock-on technology was so cool for its time, so it was more than worth it. In my opinion, this was definitely the pinnacle of the classic era of Sonic, as it truly improved upon its predecessors in every way. There are far more zones this time around, but not only that, most zones are actually extremely enjoyable and consistent, which stands in stark contrast to the first Sonic game. And even though I was harsh on the Blue Blur's first adventure, it's more than safe to say that things only went up from there, well, at least for the next few years. Sonic 3 Knuckles, as the name implies, introduces the infamous Red Echidna, Knuckles. He would serve as sort of a rival to Sonic, at least until later when he discovers that the entire time he was being fooled by Dr. Eggman into believing that Sonic had stolen the Master Emerald. And for a game without voice acting, or even text, it does a pretty respectable job at conveying the story strictly through gameplay. When fighting Knuckles, you can see a mural which depicts Super Sonic fighting to take back the Emerald, and the level of emotion they were able to fit into Knuckles when he realizes that he had been fooled is astonishing. It really is one of the best examples of story in a video game. So that's the story, but what about the gameplay itself? Well, first of all, there are a few noticeable changes this time around. For starters, Sonic now possesses a technique known as the Insta-Shield. This is an incredibly useful move, and though it only lasts for a brief moment, it can actually help immensely in defeating certain enemies which would otherwise be quite difficult to take down. It also helps boss fights become more manageable in situations where there are multiple distractions on screen. However, it can make a few of these, well, let's just say, underwhelming, for lack of a better word. But besides that, there are now elemental shields, which are just upgraded versions of the regular shield. All of these function in totally unique ways and are a great addition. The bubble shield allows Sonic to breathe underwater and bounces him to the ground whenever the jump button is pressed mid-air. The flame shield grants immunity to all fire enemies in lava, as well as allowing you to boost forward. And the lightning shield attracts all rings in the area, allows Sonic to run on electric platforms, and gives you another jump mid-air, essentially serving as a double jump. These are much more interesting and enjoyable to use compared to the old basic shield, so I don't know why you would ever pick that over the elemental shields. And can I just say, I absolutely love Sonic's sprite this time around. I know it's different than before, and while I love both versions, I just love how snarky Sonic looks here, like he's just constantly ready to beat someone up. It's great. So before I talk about the different zones of the game, I would like to give a shout out to It for all the hard work poured into Sonic 3 Angel Island Revisited. This is by far the definitive way to play Sonic 3, and as such, this is what I will be playing for the review. There are just so many options here, some of which I didn't even know what to do with. There's even a remastered version of all the game's soundtracks which you can use, which all sound incredible. And if you really want, you can even switch to the PC port's rendition of certain themes, such as Ice Cap or Carnival Night Zone. I personally didn't make any changes to the music except for Carnival Night Zone Act 2 because I think the prototype actually sounds better than the final release. I mean, just listen to this. So good, man. Well, onto the zones themselves, these are just a blast to play through. There's such a large variety here, which all aim to offer something totally unique and different than what we've ever seen before. Every zone is also incredibly cohesive, which is a brilliant touch. Rather than switching to a black screen when progressing to Act 2 of a certain zone, there's some kind of event that transpires which seamlessly transitions you into the second part. For example, after completing Act 1 of Angel Island Zone, the entire place is set on fire, thus starting up Act 2. This not only progresses the game story-wise, but it carries with it an entirely new aesthetic to the level. Another thing I love about each zone is how drastic the shift in pacing is between acts. Rather than being jarring, it actually breaks up the gameplay perfectly into 2 different segments, which each tests the player on a separate skill. Hydrocity Zone is one of my favorite examples, as this is certainly the best water-themed Sonic level, at least for the 2D entries. Even when you are forced to platform underwater, it rarely lasts more than a few seconds before you are shot out of water onto dry land. and the transition into Act 2 only exemplifies this more. Now, there are these huge water slides which launch Sonic across the stage. It's like an even more enjoyable version of Chemical Plant Zone in my opinion. I also like how Sandopolis Zone starts you out in the scorching hot desert with tons of loop-de-loops and speed sections, only to bring you into the depths of an ancient pyramid for the second act. Oh, and you can't forget Mushroom Hill, which literally changes seasons throughout this level, all while looking beautiful in the process. The cohesion just works so well and truly was a genius choice by the developers. Not only do level themes change between acts, but so does the music. This is by far my favorite touch in the game, as the shift in songs perfectly conveys the main theme of each unique level. Literally any level could be used in his example here, as Sonic 3 has a fantastic soundtrack, but some of my favorite transitions include the shift from Hydrosity between acts, as well as Lava Reef, Ice Cap, and Sandopolis. In Hydrosity Zone, the second act's music is extremely fast-paced and immediately sets the mood for what's to come. Lava Reef is also brilliant because the first zone has this epic feeling to it, but since Act 2 takes place in an underground crystal cavern, the music reflects that in its peaceful nature. Ice Cap starts out fast with lots of instruments, however, when the shift occurs it loses a lot of the instrumentation, which in turn makes positions of the song feel empty, perhaps to reflect upon the harsh cold winds present in the openness of Act 2. Those were just a few examples, but I'd really enjoy this soundtrack as it's something that a lot of games just don't pull off well, even today. Another major improvement this time around is the bonus stages. These are actually quite different ones now. Like before, passing a checkpoint with 50 rings will bring you to a bonus stage, but these are just sort of mini games for 1-ups or shields. The real attraction here is the blue spheres bonus stage, which can be found just by entering these giant rings around each stage. In my opinion, this is the best of all the bonus stages. And though it can definitely get old and repetitive after a while, I feel as though they offer a much more skill-based challenge compared to the likes of Sonic 1 and 2. And what makes these so great is that you don't need any rings to find them. So rather than forcing you to go through every stage extremely carefully, now it's just a matter of hunting these giant rings down, which is fun because it can all be done at your own pace. However, now that I've gone over all my positives on the game, it's time for the negatives, but don't worry, there really isn't that much, especially compared to Sonic 1. So for starters, some of the zones here are super tedious. For example, Marble Garden Zone. I actually really love this zone for the music and atmosphere, but when taking the gameplay into account, it's honestly pretty poorly constructed. Using these tops to get around isn't very enjoyable, and it can be frustrating getting to a certain point in the level, only to realize that you need one of these things in order to progress. The zone also just goes on for way too long, it feels like you're in here for an eternity. Carnival Night Zone also frustrates me, particularly Act 2, and this is also the source of many rage quits due to these dumb barrels. The very first time I encountered these, I had no idea that all I needed to do was move up and down on the D-pad. Same goes with those levers in Mushroom Hill Zone. But besides that, there are just way too many unnecessary obstacles in Carnival Night Act 2, which just serve as more of a nuisance than anything else. My last complaint takes place with the final boss, but I'm going to talk about that with the rest of the endgame. So the final normal zone is the Death Egg Zone. Technically, the true last level is the Doomsday Zone, but you can only access this once collecting at least 7 Chaos Emeralds, so in other words, you must be supersonic for this. But anyways, the Death Egg Zone is alright. It's much better than the final zones from the previous games, but just like Marble Garden Zone, I just think this place goes on a bit too much and relies on the gravity gimmick too often. The final boss has 2 phases, with the chase sequence at the very end. The first phase is easy enough, just blow up all the mechanical hands, but the real problem lies within phase number 2. First off, it can be very hard to figure out which parts of the robot you're actually supposed to hit here. And since there's no checkpoint, dying means restarting back at phase 1. It also doesn't help that you have 0 rings here, unless you're able to get through the first part without dying a single time. But once you do find out what to do, it really isn't that difficult, it mainly just requires that you pay close attention to its patterns in order to avoid their laser beam and fire. After this, you have to chase down Eggman, and just a tip, do not hit him from the side. Make sure you're only hitting him from underneath like I'm doing here, otherwise your momentum will send you flying off the stage, requiring you to restart the entire boss fight. But if you manage to do this, then the game is officially completed, and oh boy, what a journey. This definitely offers a more fulfilling and packed adventure than any other Sonic game released prior. Every level here is brimming with personality and truly delivers everything you could want from a Sonic game. It's a shame that this was one of the last games in the franchise we got that was truly amazing before things started to take a turn for the worse. I can only hope that one day, Sega masters this abused franchise and becomes capable of pumping out consistently good Sonic games, much like the Legend of Zelda series does. Time is everything, as we see with each new Zelda game taking about 6 years to release between each installment. I think if Sega was willing to invest more time and genuine care into modern Sonic, then we wouldn't end up with travesties like Sonic 06. And thank you all so much for watching, have a great one whenever you're seeing this, and I'll catch you later.